right, happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of In Case You Missed It. It's the Friday before a long holiday weekend, and it's just us this week talking about the world of GovTech. There's, of course, been so much that's changing, so we thought it would be great to just carve some time out and share some things that caught our attention and our eyes this week. So, Joe, I'll let you kind of kick things off with one of the first reads of the week that caught your attention. Let's go to the Utah DOT turns to real-time imagery to track road conditions.
Yeah, I mean, we're big fans of what government's doing on emerging technology, and this represents another use case. The state of Utah and the Department of Transportation is going to launch a pilot here coming up in a few days on June 1st with a technology provider called Blinksy, and they're going to provide imagery of their roadway over 350 miles of interstate just inside Salt Lake County. But it's going to be using AI and their paver platform to capture imagery from dash cameras. And those dash cameras are going to come from ride-hailing drivers, truck drivers, and others operating in the professional driving space. And from the state's perspective, it's going to give them a window into the conditions of roadways in a much more immediate fashion, unlike they've had before. So really interested to see what the results of this pilot will be. But it's not just Utah. It turns out that this provider is also doing some work in the state of California and expects to be doing some more work in a number of states here in the very near future.
Fascinating stuff. We know that these fixed mounted cameras have so much potential to leverage that imagery, not just for understanding what's happening in the context of, the environment, but also in this case, looking at road conditions and maybe doing some predictive maintenance on top of it. So I know we've seen a lot of work there with Kansas City and others in the past. So one thing that caught my attention was around this article that was on governing about poor curb management costing cities billions. And when you think about the curb, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. I mean, now as cities are reopening, as we're kind of getting back into, the era of people starting to use these mobility systems, whether it's micromobility or mass transit systems, the curb is like the perfect place to really start to focus energy. But this was a really fascinating take to kind of look at, two different forms of curb management today. This analog curb, which, is how we normally think of it, right? An unloading zone or a loading zone, that's how we regulate it. That's how we manage it. But this digital curb concept really caught my attention. And it kind of brought back conversations that we've had with Hayden AI and others about these multidimensional spaces for not just passenger pickup and drop off, but looking at, how does micromobility systems fit in there? What about robots that are doing delivery and other things? And I think this is such an opportunity for cities, not just to, monetize the curb, but to really better understand how to put the curb to work in new ways and how these curbs are going to really be the front lines for a lot of the new use cases and innovations. And I know, we've talked about drones and other types of new delivery systems, but the sidewalks themselves, these transportation corridors are so pivotal to understanding autonomous transportation systems and how they're all going to play out. So I think this is a really fascinating look at how cities can put those to work. So definitely one that caught my attention. Jed, what was on your reading list for the week? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Definitely not intentional. So yeah, this story is actually from last week. And the reason why I'm bringing this up instead of an article that came from the last few days is that I think this story really does put things in perspective about what states and the federal government needs to start thinking about in terms of preventing another fiasco like the Colonial Pipeline hack. And, it's just incredible thinking about, first of all, the effects that this incident had. I'm actually from the South originally. I no longer live there. I'm in California. But I have to say, I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw the hack story, because I heard about the gas prices going up so much, near where I lived and everything like that. And so the issue here is that private organizations don't necessarily follow the best security guidelines. And so this article is talking about, well, what can we do about that? Because right now there's no state law that says that you have to report a breach. And that's part of the issue, is that breaches are not always reported. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it's because breaches can happen by certain actors and can happen in certain ways. And if private organizations aren't always reporting those breaches, then that's less information that everyone else has to play off of in order to ramp up their defense. And so that's why this is so important. Well, that kind of brings us around to an article that we printed a couple of days ago, I believe, that's basically talking about the Biden administration basically wanting to issue a security directive from the Transportation Security Administration that would require pipeline operators to report cyber attacks. And it says certain cyber attacks, so I'm not really sure what the delineation is there, but certain cyber attacks to the Department of Homeland Security. But I guess my question for everyone, including Joe and Dustin here, is that, is that enough? I mean, the pipeline infrastructure is not the only type of critical infrastructure. So I kind of wanted to get you guys to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that you see the Biden administration really placing a focus on cybersecurity. They had the recent executive order that came out, and then you've got this developing piece here, which is not only the breach notification, which we certainly see states that have passed their own legislation on that and more coming. But I believe that same article calls for a designated person to be in charge of cybersecurity as well. So, it'd be interesting to see how much of that will translate down into state and local government. As we all know, not every city, county, or even locality or local school district has a dedicated cybersecurity person.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really fascinating read, and I agree. I mean, with cybersecurity, it's an interesting thing in the GovTech market because you have, it's the top priority every year across the board, states, counties, cities. But it's a very reactionary thing from a spend standpoint. So as Joe and I have seen over the years, something like this will take place. Everyone in the immediate surrounding areas will start to spend more on cybersecurity defenses and, finding ways to put that in place. And it tapers off again, right? It's not a continuous investment or one that's increasing. And I think standards are important, but the problem with federal standards is that there's no funding there for the state and local governments. So, you can say, hey, follow these NIST guidelines, be FedRAMP certified. Here's new standards for pipeline, but it's like, who's going to pay for it at the end of the day? And I think that's a bigger question for a lot of state and local government agencies. I think on top of that, we've got to start to think about how to better connect the ecosystem, kind of to your point, Jed, around people not telling other people about these breaches. I mean, ransomware attacks are really prevalent. We're seeing a lot of social engineering attacks, right? Low tech, the Kevin Mitnick hacks of the past, where people are just calling and emulating people, sending fake emails, spoofing things, but they're getting wire transfers of money, and it's hitting agencies across the country. So how do we create a safe place for people to connect and to share that information in a way that is okay and that allows them to do so rather than in just a close-knit group of maybe agencies that they're around? How do we share that and learn from that nationally? But I think the fundamental business model around cybersecurity at the state and local level has an opportunity to be innovated, right? What's the new shared services model? How can states like Texas and California step up and provide cybersecurity as a managed service? We've seen DIR's done that, partnerships with AT&T. How do we take that and scale it, take it to the next level? I think that's where I see a lot of opportunity in innovation.
Yeah, I think we'll begin to see greater collaboration between the feds and the states as well. I mean, the federal agency, that CISA, they've a tremendous amount of resources that are available to states and localities and nonprofits free of charge, particularly around ransomware and phishing and many of these other kind of really prevalent threats that these organizations are facing, and it's not going away. Whether it's the pipeline attack or the next one, there's a lot of focus on ransomware as a service, and it's a heck of a lot easier now to get in there and perpetrate one of these attacks without much technical skill, and that's a big challenge that governments are going to be stuck dealing with.
And Joe, to add to your point about basically how urgent this is, how other attacks are coming, another thing that article, the first article that I highlighted, talked about was that this attack on Colonial Pipeline was not from a nation state. It wasn't from some, massive organization. These were just a group of individuals. And so it should create an even deeper urgency for everyone. Like the article says, there's a whole heading that says, there's more attacks coming. And so, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to play off of Dustin's point here. It's going to be fascinating to see the innovation. It's going to be fascinating to see, how data also is going to be shared. We know data sharing in and of itself is a challenge. So that's tied up in this as well.
Yeah, and I think, the last thing I'd add on to this, kind of to, what you were talking about, Joe, with the ease of the attack. I mean, when you look at the tools, I mean, there's actually a pretty slick customer experience on the dark web when it comes to taking down or doing denial of service attacks and other things. I mean, there's a whole shopping cart infrastructure where you can put in a web URL, put your specifications on how long you want to do the attack for, pay in Bitcoin. So, I mean, these tools are not like someone sitting in, a dark room with a hoodie on and a mask, trying to take you out. I mean, you can have a disgruntled, constituent or a disgruntled, company that's in your area that, takes action this way. And so I think it's something that, we've seen big cities, we've seen small cities, we've seen states hit by it. I mean, it's kind of not an if, but when. And we have to start to think collectively about that response. And I think guidelines are important, but they don't always lead to action. So how do we spark and catalyze action and really think creatively about how to put those standards into practice, how to share information and intelligence, and kind of what's next for the apparatus of state and local government cybersecurity infrastructure.
Great points. Well, on that note, we want to thank you for joining Jed, Dustin, and I on this week's episode of In Case You Missed It. We hope you enjoy the long holiday weekend, and we'll see you in about 2 weeks for the next episode of In Case You Missed It. Take care.